the flood onward, so there's continuity in the two messages. And after each talk, we'll have a brief question and answer period where you can save up your questions or complaints, and we'll hopefully talk about it afterwards. So this first talk was Noah's flood real? And this is a video I took of the flood model these guys made in Kentucky. And they made a 1-to-1 ratio of Noah's Ark. So this is 300 cubits by 50 by 30 cubits. Believe it or not, it's quite extraordinary. So when I was in university, my evolutionary geology professors, they specifically made points to point out why the Bible was incorrect. And one of their favorite points was to make fun of the story of Noah's Ark. And they were saying, like, well, this is a fairy tale that some Christians believe actually happened, right? But you guys are college-educated, kids. You don't fall for this. And I still remember, like, sitting in the crowd being like, oh no, am I the only Christian in this crowd? Nobody else is feeling uncomfortable. I feel super uncomfortable, And I felt like super small in that moment, mainly because how do I defend my faith? How do I defend the Bible? And I couldn't really disprove anything he had to say. Likewise, for many Christians, even today, when confronted with this, they also believe that this story is too difficult to prove, or even agree that maybe the story of Noah and the flood, maybe that's just allegory, or maybe that's just literal embellishment. Maybe it wasn't that big, or maybe it didn't even happen at all. And this is what brings me to ask the question tonight first, before we study it, why is the Noah's flood narrative even important? Why are we even going over this today? So many times when we think of Noah's Ark, you think about this, and this is in a lot of coloring books today, right? As the premier example of Noah's Ark, where, you have a couple of beavers maybe chowing down a little bit too much. Oh no, what's Noah going to do, right? And it's kind of bursting at the seams. All these animals can barely fit in this comically small boat. And sometimes the story of Noah's Ark is focused only as maybe a, kids' church or Sunday school story, as a cute story for kids. And today, many Christians actually carry that forward, their view of Noah's flood. And it's actually quite damaging. They don't accept a plain reading of this account in Genesis, or they believe it's a peaceful or a local flood. It's much smaller, or they think this is just an allegory about sin. However, if we begin to question the truthfulness about Genesis, it calls into question about the truthfulness of the entire Bible. And believe it or not, atheists and critics have picked on this quite readily here. And let me read you guys a quote by Thomas Huxley. He's actually a 19th century anthropologist, and he actually coined the term agnostic. I'm just going to read this for you, and I know it's on the screen as well. I confess, I soon lose my way when I try to follow those who walk delicately among types and allegories. A certain passion of clearness forces me to ask bluntly whether the writer means to say that Jesus did not believe the stories in question, or that he did. When Jesus spoke, as a matter of fact, that the flood came and destroyed them all, did he believe that the deluge really took place or not? So this is a very important question he asked. They picked on it. This is the 18th century here, because Jesus himself refers to Noah's flood. When's that? That's in Matthew chapter 24. I don't know if you remember that. Jesus himself referenced the global flood as a real event. So was Jesus just lying? Or was he just patronizing his disciples when he was talking about that, knowing if he is the Son of God, knowing that the story isn't true? And many liberal theologians try to explain that, well, Jesus wasn't referencing a literal flood, and this is why this quote from Huxley is important. It hits nail on the head, as a matter of fact. And basically, he goes on saying this, which illustrates the point more clearly. Moreover, I venture to ask what sort of value, as an illustration of God's methods of dealing with sin, has on the account of an event that never happened. If no flood swept the careless people away, how is the warning more worth than the cry of wolf when there is no wolf? So you have to understand, brothers and sisters, in both statements, the real heart of the matter is laid out. This is the character of God that's in question here. And it's contested in both statements. Does God really care about sin? Is Jesus just patronizing his followers? Huxley is correct in his assertion. If Scripture is not inerrant, then it calls into question the truthfulness of God's character. Either the events and the character of God are true or they're not. So with that, we're going to go over the question, is the Genesis account of Noah's flood credible? And we're going to review the scientific evidence. So we need to ask the question today, is this account credible today? And a more interesting question, does secular science confirm these accounts? And the first evidence I want to talk about is global cultural evidences. Did you guys know that in every single culture today, they have a Noah's flood myth? And you think this is kind of strange. Why would they have these type of myths? And let me talk about some of them. In the Babylonian account, Unapsum was commanded to build a boat to survive a worldwide flood and bring animals onto the boat. You can see he commanded to bear a cube ark. Do you see that? A perfect cube. It's kind of interesting. How about the Sumerian legend of Noah's Ark? And this is when we teach our kids. This is the salad bowl ark, as you can see here. I don't know how seaworthy that is. But in the Sumerian legend, the god Enki warns the last king of Sumer prior to the Great Flood to build a large boat. Interesting. What about the Indian legends? In it, Amatsu avatar of the Vishnu warns the first man, Manu, of the impending flood, also to advise him to build a giant boat. And do you see his boat? It's kind of like there's a whale in the background with a harpoon in it. It's kind of like a motor that kind of drives this boat around, right? They have a little bit more imagination in theirs. And the Greek legend, the myth of Decathlon, states that after human beings were created, they disobeyed the gods. It was decided that they should be destroyed. The righteous Decathlon and his wife were spared in an ark from a flood that destroyed mankind. Decathlon's ark landed on a mountain, and after surviving the flood, he offered sacrifices. Do you guys notice there's a high degree of similarity of all these stories? Don't you think that's kind of strange? And other people have mapped this out here. You can see this chart here where that horizontal axis represents different cultures of the world, and that vertical axis there are actually Bible passages. So you can actually see the amount of similarities in this. And we can get over this in a little bit more detail, where if you look at all the accounts, you'll see that in all the stories, 88% of these stories have a favored family. 66% of them were forewarned. 66% of those stories the flood was due to the wickedness of man. 95% of those stories, a catastrophic flood was involved, and which the flood was global. And 70% of the stories, survival was due to a boat. 67% have animals involved, or animals were saved, and 73% animals were played a part. So we have to ask a question here. You got to think about this. Why should every culture in the world have a flood legend? Did they have internet back then, kids? Did they have mailing systems? Did they write letters? No, they didn't have any of that. How could everyone know? You have to understand, if the flood of Noah was just folk legend or folk tales, like most folk tales today, like legends of leprechauns or legends of werewolves, they're regional in nature. They're never global. And this is strange. So the most reasonable explanation is that this was a very real event, and it was passed down to every culture through Noah's descendants. And even though every culture in the world has a piece of the puzzle of Noah's flood, only the Bible has the complete picture, and actually it's the most scientifically accurate picture that we have. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to look at what makes the biblical account unique, and we're going to start by reading Genesis. We're going to establish a chronology of the flood, and we're looking at specific details in Genesis. So with that, if we look at the book of Genesis, sorry, I know the font's super small, but I'm going to blow up some portions of it. We're going to look through Genesis chapter 7 and 8, and we're going to establish a chronology of events. So we're going to say, okay, what happened on day 0? So that comes from Genesis chapter 7, verse 11. It says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, in the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Do you guys see how precise the timing is? It gave exactly what day of Noah's life this occurred. So that's when the flood starts on day 0. And then verse 24, it says the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. And this is important, right? The Bible's giving us a chronology. We're just reading what happens. Now, if we go to chapter 8 of Genesis, and we take a look at the verses, I want to figure out how long it took the flood to end. And you can see here, it says the 10th month and the 10th day and the 40 days and whatnot. I'm just going to convert all this into days, right? So sorry, a day 150 represents the max water level, right? 150 days. And if we convert all those months and days into just straightforward days, and we add up, if we line them up, and we add up all those days, this is how long it took for the flood waters to recede. So this is an additional 220 days. So altogether, if you take the biblical chronology, it took 370 days from beginning to end when Noah entered the ark and when the floods blew up. The waters of the deep blew up, till when Noah left the ark. And this is important. If you ask people today, how long did Noah's flood take? People are like, 40 days and 40 nights. No, it was actually 370 days. So a lot of things actually happened during this time. So, flood details. The next thing I want to look in Scripture is how much flooding. Maybe it was a literal embellishment. What does Scripture actually say? And what died? Now, this is important. So with this, we're going to go back to Genesis chapter 7, specifically between verses 17 and 24. And we're going to take a look at some of these verses where this talks about how great the waters were and what died. So if we divide it into two categories here, we see that how much flooding occurred first. Well, it says the waters prevailed greatly and increased on the earth, and the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered, and the mountains were covered. So if you look at it, so all the high hills were covered. How many? All. All is pretty definitive. And the mountains were covered. And you see this, the waters prevailed greatly. The waters prevailed exceedingly. So could this be just a local flood, a small-scale flood, if you want to honor the text? No, because simply, does water obey political boundaries? Brothers and sisters, will it stop in a local area? It's like, well, sorry, we can't get past the Mesopotamian area. We will cover all the mountains, though, but we will stop as soon as we exit the region. No, water does not obey political allegiances. It will cover over. So if you want to honor the text, there's only one interpretation. It can't just be a local flood. It has to be global. Now, if we look at what died, this is also very interesting. Because if you look at the text here, it says, so he destroyed how much? All living things that were on the face of the ground. Both man and cattle, creeping thing and bird of the air. Not the sea creatures you can see in there. Just man and cattle, creeping thing and bird of the air. All in whose nostrils was the breath of life, the spirit of life. All that was on the dry land died, and all flesh died. So this is it's pretty clear. If it was a local flood, it would have not killed all of the ground animals around the whole earth. But in the text here, it says all multiple times. So this gives us clear instruction what happened. So with this biblical chronology in mind, what the Bible's intent, let's go back to Noah's flood here in terms of scientific evidence. Now, we have to remember, when people talk about this local flood, they talk about this gentle type of flooding. But what do we know about modern floods today? Are modern floods destructive? Yes. You have huge infrastructure damage, huge economic damage associated with flooding. And it's no joke, right? Things get destroyed. And this is what floods actually look like. They can't be tranquil or peaceful. They do, and these are local floods. These are not even, these are pretty powerful. But sometimes we forget that in rural areas, flooding is actually quite damaging. It's difficult to understand. And do you see the image on the top of all those logs? Do you see any water in there? No, but I can guarantee you water is in there. Water does two things very, very well, and this is what geology, me being a geologist, will tell you. It erodes and it deposits. So what erosion is, as a reminder, it will pick up stuff, including giant boulders. See those boulders in the bottom right? Those are actually the size of cars. Easy. It throws them around. Water is hugely erosive, And what it does is it breaks down things and transports them. And then after it transports them, what does it do? It deposits. So these are geologic things. They erode and deposit. You got to remember that. This is associated with flooding. So now, if I were to go to my university today and go to my geology professor and I ask them, is there any evidence of Noah's flood? Guess what they're going to tell me? There's no evidence. If I rephrase the question, though, and say, hey, professor, is there any mysteries in geology today? They'd be like, oh my goodness. Don't you know there's so many mysteries in geology today? Like, there's mysteries of the Great Unconformity. What is that? And there's mysteries of the Cambrian explosion. We don't know how that happened. And there's mysteries of minerals that shouldn't exist. Or there's mysteries of mass extinctions. We don't know what killed them all. And there's mysteries about mountain building. There's multiple mysteries in geology. And guess what, brothers and sisters? These mysteries have something in common, right? And this is what we're going to talk about. These mysteries are actually associated with water, and they actually can be answered if you read Genesis. No, there will be no more mysteries, and we're going to talk about this today. So, right, this is why we went over the chronology. What happened first when Noah's flood occurred? The fountains of the deep erupted. Now, what could have caused this scientifically, right? And I believe God's hand was in this. But most likely, whenever you have stuff happening in the subsurface, you have plate tectonics occurring. And this is another mystery in evolution is, when did plate tectonics occur? What was the mechanism that started it? And we have a mechanism right here, right? Where the plate spreadings occurred, which that hot magma would interact with the seawater, causing explosions, right? And in plate tectonics, you have massive shifting of the plates, also causing earthquakes, right? Or, you know, and what happens when you have a lot of plate movements with earthquakes? We know that tsunamis are very common. And this is from a movie. I have to explain it to some people. Some people are like, is this real? Did this happen? I'm like, no, this is from a movie. Movies are kind of useful in this, right? And we have this mystery in the rock record as well. You know, we have evidence of mega tsunamis and mega earthquakes. We have volcanoes the size of India that are found in the ancient past. We're like, well, that's strange. We don't have volcanoes the size of India today. Our volcanoes are much smaller. And we have evidence of 4 to 5 hour long earthquakes. These are how long. We have this in the geologic record. They don't know how this occurred. But this can occur easily if there is massive things happening, according to Noah's flood. Now, we talked about massive erosion. Do we have evidence of massive erosion? Yes, we do. In geology, we call it the Great Unconformity. And for you non-geologists, I guess, you would be like, what's so great about that? That just looks like a crack. Yeah, it is a crack. It's right there. And that's a Great Unconformity. But if I Google it, which I do show a Googling here, if you Google it, how many years is missing in the Great Unconformity? Scientists say it's 1.2 years, or about 25% of Earth's history is just missing globally along this great crack. Every continent of the world has a Great Unconformity. In Africa, in Canada, in the US, there's this layer where 25% of Earth's history is cleaned off. It's just gone, 25%. And what causes the most erosion? Water. And if you have to ask a scientist, what caused the Great Unconformity? They're like, we don't know. It's one of life's mysteries, I guess. But what happens, though, remember, we talked about erosion. What comes after erosion? Deposition. Where did all that sediment go? And this is where it gets kind of nutty, right? Nobody looks very far. And these are oil and gas logs that are found around the world. And one of my friends, he's the foremost expert of mega sequences. What are mega sequences? They're exactly what they sound. They're a huge sequence of rocks found globally. So what that means is, you see the blue area in Canada there, in BC and Alberta, that same rock is found in Russia. It's found in Africa. It's found in South America. You have rock layers globally found in sequence, and this is looking at oil and gas cores. And they have funny names. I never named them, someone else did. But there's 6 mega sequences. The lowest one is the Sauk mega sequence, followed by the Tippecanoe, followed by the Kaskaskia, then the Abacerica, then the Zuni, and then the Tasia. And these sequences are found one after the other globally, forming a uniform stack. And this is a mystery to evolutionists too, because they're like, well, didn't like my local river create the deposits? No. If it did, how come the rocks are so similar globally, right? So you have this global erosion, the great unconformity, and global deposition, megasequences. Now, another mystery or piece of evidence here is mass extinctions. And if I ask most kids today, what caused the extinction of dinosaurs? What caused the extinction of everything? They're like, well, meteorites. Actually, the consensus is not 100%. A lot of people, every year it changes. But what they're certain of, scientists, is that all of life got annihilated at one point in time. If I go to the Royal Trail Museum, and if you go to any museums in BC, the Royal Trail's in Alberta, you can look at multiple placards, and they say 99.9% of all animals died at one point in time. There's a huge massacre of all these animals. But they believe in not one annihilation, they believe in 6 annihilation of animals, right? And that's what they relate it. But at the same time, they say, what caused them, right? There's no continuity between the extinctions. For example, when the dinosaurs got extinct, they said it has to be meteorites. But what survived in the dinosaur age rock on after the meteorites? You have salamanders and frogs who are highly sensitive to atmospheric conditions and ash. So apparently, these tough dinosaurs couldn't cut it, but these small little frogs can. That's what there's inconsistency among the geologic community. That's just one of them. There's many. But it's interesting, when you look at these 6, and there are like mass death sites, right? But if you take these mass death sites here, these different extinction events, and you line it up to those mega sequences, do you know that they line up? So each mega deposit killed all these animals in 6 areas, and it matches up with the extinction patterns, which is strange. You have to be like, oh, why should they line up? Well, once again, scientists like myself, as a geologist, I was never trained to think globally. We never were trained to think globally. We thought regionally. What happened in Calgary? What happened in Alberta, maybe? But I never even considered BC or Saskatchewan. I just look at that, but nobody's like, well, can we consider North America? Can we consider Europe? And this is very interesting, so this is why this is fascinating. Now, the fossil record in itself can be a mystery to Christians, because oftentimes when you see it, it's just like, well, you know, I don't believe in evolution. I don't know about millions of years. And every time I look at the fossils, you know, there's this little chart on the right that talks about millions of years, and they have these fancy names, and, you know, and all the fossils, they're equally distributed. So sometimes people are like, well, if Noah's flood was real, and nothing wrong about this, right? If Noah's flood is real, shouldn't all the animals be kind of clumped on the bottom or clumped on the top? How do you evenly distribute all these fossils evenly? And I have a graphic I show kids. This is what we do in our kids' camps, and it's very expensive, you can tell. Very high quality animation I have here. But what happens is this: you have a coastal area with coastal animals, and you have, like, you know, marine animals. So what happens in Noah's flood? How long did it take? 40 days? No, it took 150 days, remember. 150 days for the waters to go up. And for you that are pet owners, what are animals good at sometimes when, you know, earthquakes start? You guys don't get earthquakes, but they're good at sensing danger. They're the first ones to run. So when Noah's flood first came about in the fountains of the deep, the water levels increased. So the animals that could kind of move away did move, and with increased flooding came deposition. And the things that couldn't move, or the things at the low-lying spots, the ocean floor, they got buried first, right? And the stuff that could move could kind of run away. And I have this little geologic column I'm building on the left top there. So those were the first to get buried, right? And then as the flood levels rose up, the next least mobile things got buried, or lowest to the ground, which is in the water basins. And dinosaurs and whatnot could run away. But then as the dinosaurs moved further inland, they went to local high spots, right? Because the water was coming, the rain was coming, so they were fleeing, so they went to local high spots where some animals were able to run further in. And then as the dinosaurs walked, and I made these little footprints there, I'll talk about that a little later, they jumped up to their local high spots, but guess what? The waters prevailed. The waters kept on getting higher and higher until even these little high spots got overwhelmed. And that you have these little areas of last stand where these animals eventually got all captured. And you might be saying, Steve, this is an interesting story, but how do I know this is true? Well, This is an interesting point. Do you know that most of the dinosaurs in North America are found on what we call Dinosaur Peninsula? This is a mass dinosaur graveyard. Do you guys see it? Right in the center. And it's not these peaceful animals. There's all these animals kind of like crammed together. In the Morrison Formation alone, which actually covers, from Texas to Arkansas there, and from Manitoba to Arizona. So Alberta to Texas, I don't know, this map's kind of weird. But Alberta to Texas, from Manitoba to Arizona, you have about 1.5 million square kilometers of dinosaur bones all scattered together, all captured together. This is highly interesting. So it covers 13 U.S. states and 3 Canadian provinces, but they're all found clustered together in this area of Last Stand. And one of the most amazing fossil graveyards found in the world is actually found in Alberta, right? And this is CBC News, the most reputable news in the world here. So you gotta look at this. But you can see here, what is there in this large dinosaur graveyard? And if you go to the Royal Trail Museum or these articles, how did they say all these animals died? Well, they died by drowning. That's the official, secular paleontologist point of view. Well, all these animals died by drowning, don't you know? And they believe to 6 to 7 flooding attempts. I believe in 1. I believe in this drowning. But it's not in contention how they died. Everyone agrees they died by drowning. So this is not even disputed. But what about Europe? And this is very interesting. This is another secular research paper here. And they say this. There's a scientist that actually looked at all the dinosaur-bearing rock in the Upper Cretaceous, and that's just a geologic layer. And they looked across all of the continent of Europe. They're like, I wonder how these dinosaurs died. And it's found in all these papers that nearly all late Cretaceous dinosaurs across the entire continent of Europe were buried in marine sedimentary rock. That means they were buried underwater. So you're finding this more and more. This is the main mechanism how dinosaurs died, en masse in large regional areas. But I want to talk about the little details. Sometimes you look at the big. I want to talk about the small details, which are the footprints of the dinosaurs. And interesting enough, most of the dinosaur trackways found in North America are all pointed in one direction. This is very interesting. I talked to Pastor Steve here about hunting. I don't know if how many of you are hunters in the crowd. But whenever you see an animal, whenever you're stalking an animal, right, you're always walking quietly, right? You don't want to step on twigs. And what's the first thing that happens when you step on a twig? When you're stalking a deer, it peaks up, and sometimes it just bolts, right? So in the fossil record, same thing with animals. And remember, according to an evolutionist, the fossil record captures just the everyday, boring minutia of life. That's what it has. But why do you find all the trackways all pointed in one direction in a line? Shouldn't you see meandering? And for you hunters that stalk deer, you always see the deers meander, right? Sometimes they bed down, sometimes they stand up, but you don't see meandering in the fossil record. You see them bolt forward. But another interesting thing is the dinosaur trackways, and specifically the lack of tail drag marks. And you might think well, that's boring. Who cares about tail drag marks? And I was a child of the 80s, and one of my favorite things to do was watch dinosaur things, right? And, I saw a lot of dinosaur TV shows, but I want to let you look at the tails. What do you see the tails doing? They're just dragging on the ground like how you would see kangaroos in a zoo. This is what animals usually look like. But if you look at more modern dinosaur movies, you never see the tails on the ground. The producers, whenever they talk to paleontologists, are like, what do you find them in the fossil record? So if you look carefully, and I've noticed this too, none of the tails are on the ground anymore. They're always popped up in the air. They're always swaying back and forth. There's a reason for that. Although we find trillions of dinosaur footprints, we never find the tail drag marks. We rarely find them. People are like, well, that's odd. If the fossil record captures the everyday boring minutia of animals, why do we get the footprints and no tail drag marks? And let me ask you a question. Why would you get footprints with no tail drag marks in the fossil record? Is that they were running in water? This is the most logical thing. And for you guys, for footprints, how long do footprints last on a beach typically? Would they last a week? Would they last a month? Maybe millions of years? No, footprints are actually a timestamp in it of themselves. The only way to actually capture a footprint is for a footprint to be made on wet ground, which you see here, but it needs to be buried with a different type of sediment after it. So it needs to be walking on wet sediment, and then another type of sediment has to go over and capture it before the water can destroy it. And this is why I showed that picture here. What was happening to all these animals? What were they doing? They were running for their lives. And why? What was coming after them? The debris to cover them. Now, you see this, where the footprints were made and this dinosaur hopped up to higher land here. This is another picky detail I want to talk about. Because, yes, there is a pattern in the fossil record that footprints are found in strata millions of years before the foot bones. And evolutionists never explained how the critters survived millions of years after leaving its footprint until it finally got buried. And this is an interesting point because these footprints are found on rocks below, and then they get covered with sediment because that's how you protect them. And then the actual dinosaur that made it is found on the rock layer above. And whenever you have a distance of even of a foot of sediment or a meter of sediment, you're talking about conventionally, evolutionists believe that's hundreds of years, thousands of years, sometimes hundreds of thousands of years of timing, a foot of sediment in a meter. So that should be strange. You have evidence of all these animals and no evidence of the animal itself for millions of years. That doesn't make any sense. But this is a common fact in the fossil record. And the reason why I want to pick out these small details is that whenever you come up, and especially for you kids and young people, whenever you come up with a scientific model, it doesn't matter with just the larger aspects of the details. Even the small details matter. And if the small details are consistent with the large details, that model has a high degree of scientific veracity or truth in it. And that's how you build a scientific model, right? So this is why it's very interesting when you read the Bible, and you're like, I wonder if this could be true. And you look at the events of Noah's flood and you look at the science, and it's very interesting. Now, I'll stop talking about geology now. I'm a geologist, but I'll talk about Noah's Ark here. And I want to talk about the accuracy of this, and sometimes this does a disservice, right? And if we took this ark into the flood, most likely it would not survive, right? And I like this cartoon. It shows that only an ark of biblical dimensions could survive a flood of biblical proportions. And like I said at the beginning, my wife and I went to Kentucky to see Noah's Ark, and there's my wife there right now. And that's to scale. That is 30 cubits high by 50 cubits wide and 80 cubits long. Do you guys see that? It's quite impressive when you actually see it, and these guys in Kentucky actually rebuilt it. And because of its size, it could fit multiple cages. They can actually fit all the animals quite easily and all the food and water needed for 370 days. Remember, it wasn't a permanent zoo. But I want to talk about actually how amazing Noah's Ark is. You see, if we look at Noah's Ark here and we compare it to other ancient boats like the Pressy canoe, you guys see that it bears no resemblance. And the Pressy canoe is actually the oldest boat archaeologists have found. Doesn't look like it. And even if we move into newer boats, I guess, like the 7th and 4th century BC, like the Greek trireme, it doesn't look the same. Or the British East Indiaman, 1600 to 1900 AD, doesn't look like Noah's Ark. Or 1800 steamships, doesn't look like it. Or the Titanic, which is looking kind of close. Or ocean freighters, we're getting closer. But the closest representation of Noah's Ark is modern ocean container ships. And when I say, and you guys might recognize these container ships, right? There was a horrible thing that happened a couple of years ago when all our Amazon packages got delayed. You guys remember that? And the boat blocked it. It's like, oh no, this boat is these container ships. And when I mean similarity, if you actually take the length to width ratio, like 300 cubits by 50, and the Ever Given, which blocked, the Panama Canal, the 400 by 61, do you notice the length to width ratio is 1 to 6 for the Ark and 1 to 6.6? And that's interesting. How did naval engineers come up with this ratio of the container ship? Well, through hundreds and thousands of years of naval engineering, we found a ship that could contain cargo but survive oceans. And that's how this boat came to be. But how did Noah create his boat with very nearly the same ratio? Which is strange. And, over time, people have tried to discredit Noah's Ark. So I don't even need to show you, creationist papers. I'm going to show you just evolutionary papers here. Could Noah's Ark float? In theory, yes. And actually, scientists from the University of Leicester actually did a study, engineering students, of whether or not Noah's Ark could have floated. And he did the calculations like, not only would it have floated based on the weight, it could carry 70,000 animals. And here's a quote from the actual paper from these scientists. You don't think of the Bible necessarily as a scientifically accurate source of information. So I guess we were quite surprised when we discovered it would work. And other scientists have actually done the math. Noah only needed to bring 7,000 animals onto the ark. Remember, two of every kind, seven of every clean kind, right? And that number comes up to 7,000. So we didn't need 70,000, only 7,000. So you can fit all the animals on the ark. But it's interesting enough, if you look, the Korean Institute of Ship Engineering, Crisco here, they did another research project here, where in this paper, Safety Investigations of Noah's Ark in a Seaway, the lead author here, Dr. Shang Hong, actually built 1/50th scale models of Noah's Ark, and they put it in their wave tank. Do you guys see that wave tank? This is how they test ships, by the way, kids. They have this swimming pool, and they stick little boats, and they create waves to try to knock it down. So in his paper here, he built 1/50th scale models of Noah's Ark, each altering the dimensions slightly, and put it in the wave tank. And what they found is the dimensions as written in the Bible, if you put it in this wave tank, these boats, Noah's Ark would have been almost impossible to capsize. Even if you bent it almost at 90 degrees, it would not capsize. Isn't that interesting? He said nothing outperformed, nothing. Out of the 4,300-year-old biblical design outperformed all the other hull shapes in the study. And more interesting, if you look at the American Bureau of Shipping website, if you look at their rules and guidelines for safety in their website, which is kind of boring, but someone did it. So I'll tell you what happened. If you applied the American Bureau of Shipping's rule for safety classifications to these hull forms, it was found that the Ark was 13 times more stable than the standard for safety required by ABS rule. Isn't that interesting? And how it translates is that they found that the Ark could have withstood waves more than 30 meters or 100 feet high. And as a drifting ship, the Ark had a reasonable length width depth ratio for the safety of the hull, crew, and cargo in high winds and waves. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked before. If Noah's Ark is one of the first boats ever made, the very first boats ever made, remember, it's in the Bible, how did Noah figure out the ideal ratio? How did he draft these plans? And you have to remember, Noah didn't. God did. And God said to Noah, Noah, build an ark, 300 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits, right? God gave all these plans ahead of time. And for you woodworkers out there and engineers, even measurements matter, right? Measurements given in the Bible. I know engineers or woodworkers would appreciate this. Preciseness also matters. So now, in summary here, isn't it amazing that evidence of Noah's flood is all around us? And everything we see today is a result of Noah's flood. And we see global erosion, we see global deposits, and we see global death. Secular scientists struggle for a rational explanation. But this is exactly as the Bible predicted. If we are Bible-believing Christians, this is it. It tells us. And isn't it actually amazing, the amazing engineering feat of Noah's Ark, which rivals the modern designs of cargo ships? You think about that. Isn't that amazing? One of the first ships ever built. So you have to understand the Bible was written before modern naval engineering or modern geologic studies were done. And how did the Bible get so many of these details correct? And this is important to understand. And I know for many of you, some of you here, maybe this has been a sticking point in your lives. Maybe you're here today and you've not made a decision to follow Jesus. Or maybe you're kind of full of doubts. Is what the Bible says, even this is the story of Noah's Ark, is that a fairy tale? Or maybe you hold a little bit of doubts about that. But I just want to encourage you today that a simple reading of the Bible can be trusted. And it's not only true morally as a moral document, but it's also true historically and scientifically as well. The reality of Noah's flood causing the death of millions of animals is actually there for us to touch and see and You kids today, you guys found evidence of Noah's flood, believe it or not. You brought it home with you today, some of you by the armloads, but it's good. So hopefully this is encouraging for you tonight as we go over this. And just as a bit of extra resources here, if you want any extra resources, I have a YouTube channel and a podcast that goes over different stuff about this in, about a minute or two. We call it the Creation Minute, that talks about different aspects of science. So if you want more information, this is all for free. You can just scan the QR code and you can find it. But other than that, we can move into a question and answer period here. If you have any questions of this talk or anything else about science, I'll attempt to answer it, or I'll point you off to Pastor Steve, and he will answer such questions. Oh, yes.
There's fossils of almost like lizard-like sea creatures, but we don't have lizard-like sea creatures anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point. And actually, further to that point, 80%, it's 65% of the mammals that boarded Noah's Ark never made it. They actually went extinct afterwards. There was a lot of differences and changes in the world after the flood was over, right? So a lot of these animals didn't survive. Not only, dinosaurs. Dinosaurs boarded the Ark all right, but when they came off the Ark, and it's actually fascinating about dinosaurs because there's a lot of evidence of dinosaurs interacting with humans in the past in artwork. There's a cool book I have, and Pastor Steve has, that talks about that, how dinosaurs and humans interacted. But a lot of animals didn't survive, and I know growing up as a kid, we talked about the dodo bird, or different animals that just, were overhunted or just couldn't survive in this new world. So yeah, there's animals that just didn't survive as well, and some reptiles, absolutely, or certain mammals, birds. A lot of animals didn't survive afterwards. But that's a good question. Is this a prospect of ecological changes that did occur on the earth? Yeah. Is that okay?
Well, I might have misunderstood.
Oh.
Like actual ocean creatures that are like lizards that I might have been wrong when I was listening.
Oh, yeah. Or
They're like sea creatures.
yeah.
I assume wouldn't go on to
Oh, yeah.
You're saying the world changed.
Yeah.
Changed.
Yeah. Like mosasaurs, that's a big. Yeah, that's a big reptile. Yeah, and I don't know if its food it was hunting, if that died out too. These are large reptiles, like large type of people would call them water dinosaurs, right, or sauropods, stuff like that. A lot of them did not board the Ark. They were not those type of creatures, but there's a lot of traumatic things that happened when the fountains of the deep opened up, when plate tectonics occurred. You have the amount of mineralogy changed, right? There was mixing of some different salinities of the waters, right? And there was segregation. Some sea animals did survive, but you have evidence in the fossil record of huge amounts of sea creatures captured and buried. Like a lot of mosasaurs did die via burying as well. So even the trauma of the flood might have wiped out some animals with the underwater burials as well. Yeah. So there's more in-depth articles I can send you as well. I know these are kind of quick answers, but a lot of them did get buried in underwater debris flows and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay. That's good. Yes.
The term fossil fuel.
Yes.
What is that?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. I used to work in oil and gas, and I learned a lot of stuff. I'm going to start with what we learned in school. What we learned in school is animals were buried, right? And that's what caused fossil fuels, and I was okay with that answer. Then I met some Russian geologists one day in Russia, and they came up to me and said, "Steve, have you ever heard of millionaire wells?" I'm like, "No, I haven't heard of millionaire wells. What are those?" Well, they've drilled into Precambrian rock, and what Precambrian rock is rock that has no fossils in it. We believe it's creation rock. And Nobody in North America would ever drill in the Precambrian rock to get natural gas. But that's what the Russians did. And they're like, and now they're all millionaires. That's why they're called millionaire wells. So it makes me question, what is methane derived by, right? What is methane always an organic type of derivative? Another clear evidence of this is one of the planets that circle, I think, Uranus. It's like Titan, in which there's lakes of methane on that moon. So if I were to believe that oil and gas or fossil fuels only came from living objects, I would have to believe there were aliens on Titan that made lakes of methane, which I don't believe that happened. So there has to be an anaerobic form of fossil fuel generation that we're not certain of. And I don't know the mechanism, but I know there's evidence of fossil fuels that are not attached to organics. So do I have a comprehensive guide for you? No. But do I agree, like my Russian counterparts do? They're all millionaires, so I'm not going to argue with them. They drill it, and it's still giving them, they're still pumping methane out of there. So it's very interesting. So I am inconclusive. That's my answer to you. Any other questions? Yes. It's a good question. Yeah. So the only reason they're a mystery, the evolutionists, is that whenever I know the mountainscapes near my household or near my neck of the woods, but I think in BC you often see mountain ranges with this wild like banding in there. And this is impossible in an evolutionary paradigm in a model because they believe it took millions of years for these rock layers to build, and it took millions of years for the rock layers to slowly nudge up over from Alberta to BC until it became these landforms. And the thing is, solid rock, does it bend like Play-Doh? No, we know that. Does wood bend like Play-Doh? No. And when we talk about mountain building, that's how I'm taught in university. It slowly got nudged up. And they're like, well, the reason why it bent is that it heated up like a metamorphic rock. And I've actually personally went on field studies where I've sampled, some of these folds. I sampled the core of those folds. Why did I sample the core? Because if you take rock and if you take anything like wood and you bend it, the maximum amount of energy is in that fold, right? So if heat is generated in that fold, that's where you would find it. So if you wanted to say that these folds are meant by slow pushings of rocks in which, over time it's superheated and created this bend, we should find metamorphism. So that sedimentary rock would have turned to metamorphic rock. And sampling multiple of these hinge points, and other people have done this as well, they're all sedimentary rock. It hasn't turned the marble, it hasn't turned the slate, hasn't turned the variety of metamorphic rocks, it's remained a cold rock. And that's why evolutionists are like, this is a mystery. But in a creationist model, all this mountain building happened in those 370 days when plate tectonics, that's why I showed you, when the fountains of the deep erupted and it shifted the plains, it pushed all that wet sediment that was still soft, it hadn't liquefied yet, and it pushed it up. And that's why you see all these intricate foldings. And in university, when I went to mountain building class, whenever they showed mountains being formed, they always used Play-Doh, which I think is a huge injustice. They have to use solid rock if you really believe it. But they always use Play-Doh as their model. And that's why they could create those nice folds. And that's the only way to do it, I believe. The sediment had not liquefied or turned into rock. It was still soft. That's why. But that would say that it happened rapidly then. It happened rapidly to the point the rock didn't have time to solidify. Yes, that's the only way. So that's why it's like in a creationist model, this is not a mystery. This occurred rapidly, quick, and while it was still wet, right? In an evolutionary paradigm, it is a mystery because they don't believe in fast movements. They believed in liquefaction beforehand. So that's why like you can look at the mountains like, hey, look, evidence of Noah's flood. Just like that, right? But not to an evolutionist. It's a good question. Hmm. Yep. Oh, it's incredible. is incredible. And it's like all over the US, all over like, in Asia, all in Europe, you'll find the same folding. So it's just like, it's not just a phenomenon in North America, it's a global phenomenon. That's why you should get them the question, maybe this was done soft, like your Plato experiments, right? But they refuse to acknowledge that. So that's the thing. I was talking to Pastor Steve earlier today. Believing in the Bible doesn't mean you forfeit a scientific mind. In fact, Christians should be the most rationally minded people. It actually takes, and God created science, therefore using science, it's very logical and rational, right, to believe in a God. It's very rational to believe God made all of this. And if you read the Bible and you look at nature, it's rational to connect the dots like, oh, this actually happened. What happened, what's stated in the Bible actually happened in real life, right? It doesn't take a lot of mental gymnastics, actually. It's very clear cut what actually has occurred. Yes.
You've probably heard all the recent news about supposedly they found Noah's Ark
Yeah.
mountains and stuff. Like, what do you think of all that? I've always
Yeah.
had the idea that there wouldn't be anything left of the
For
world.
sure.
The people existing then would have used it for
Yeah.
stuff, right? So what do you think it is that they've actually found?
Man, it's a very interesting study, and people have kept me abreast of this study. And I always say they need to do more science. They need to do more science because it looked like the shape of Noah's Ark, and it is 300 cubits. I'm like, okay, and they talk about this stuff, but they need to do more data though, because we don't know. But they've done more testing, and they've done more ground-penetrating radar, and what they found is further structures below. And some people believe that it is like, I've seen, and one sample was actually sent to our lab one time and we tested it, and it was igneous rock. And I'm like, no, we're looking for petrified wood. And you can see the telltale signs. And I'm like, all you have to do is take a piece of rock and let us analyze it. Let anybody analyze it. You can tell petrified rock from igneous rock very quickly with the right analysis. But what they find is this 90-degree structure that they found underneath it, like these cross-like structures. And they're like, this is a building, and it could be. But at the same time, igneous rocks, sills and dikes actually form this way as well under the subsurface. So they're doing this intricate study in which they're like, this is Noah's Ark, this is it. And it could be, but they're failing on the most simple testing. I'm like, why don't you it's like a $30 test. That's how much we charge for it. I'm like, this ground-penetrating radar you're doing is like probably in tens of thousands of dollars, and it takes a lot of computer processing. Why can't we just take a little sample and let me zap it? Let anybody zap it. And they haven't, and that's what I find very curious about it. They've foregone the easy meat and potatoes testing that you would do, and they went directly to the most expensive. So I don't know. It's like, it's very interesting, and for me, I'm like, I haven't put a pin on it saying yes or no, but a lot of people, like, my caution to people, it's like, don't put all your faith and hinge on finding an intact Noah's Ark for you to believe in the story. It might have been taken apart. I would have. If I was Noah and I was rebuilding my house, I'm like, look at all this milled lumber. Do I want to cut down a tree and they're going to take the milled lumber and repurpose it? I would take the milled lumber. Yeah, so it makes more sense to me as well. So could it be? Maybe. They're doing more tests, but I'm like, they're doing the wrong tests, but I don't know. So I'm just curious why they haven't done, like, all you have to do is all petrified wood. Easy. Let's go. This is perfect. I'm like, well, you haven't done that testing. You've done ground-penetrating radar, which is super expensive, but I don't know. So I just question, I would like to be a fly in the room of why they've made certain decisions, and just say, okay, that's why, or you have tested it and it's all come back negative. Therefore, this is why. I'm like, well, you should say that. I don't know. So let us know. Yeah, it is a cool story, and it might be true. I'm not saying it isn't, but it's just weird. That's all I can say. Yeah. So maybe a question. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah. Oh, no way. No way. That's so cool. Yeah. So, yeah, and honestly, the Andes, in Europe, those mountains are, they would say, older. Evolutionists, of course, believe that the Earth is about 4.8 billion years old, right? So when they're timing things like, well, this uplifted, whatever, in a creationist model, you're talking about timing differences in months, 1 month before the other. But in that time, you have to remember the whole earth was covered in water, and this uplift was occurring, and there's running water washing over. And the first mountains that did go up probably got planed off by currents and rounded them. And the Rockies are probably the last mountains to uplift. Therefore, they are the youngest because there's a sharpness to the Rockies if you walk there. You see these sharp ridges, and if you go to Europe, all their mountains are bald and rounded, and it's like, oh, so they have the appearance, and that's why they say it's older versus younger. And for sure, and there's different timings of when certain mountain ranges went up, and while where the ocean currents were still going up, giving different appearances of sharpness of peaks, and that's what they're commentating on when they talk about older versus younger, right? So, but it's very cool about the dinosaur trackways and palm trees. I would love to. My goodness, yeah. Oh, oh my goodness, yeah. Man, you guys have so much cool stuff around here. Wow, wow, very cool. Wow, I know. See how you're gonna get so many rocks in your house, Pastor Steve. You're never gonna get rid of them. So, anyways, let's take a break. You guys can go pee, grab some more coffee, and then we can start the next session. 10 minutes.